Hey everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. I mean, we are talking history, which is kind of our specialty here, but it's a little bit more like, modern history, recent history, ongoing history. I'm here with my guy, Brin-Jonathan Butler, author, filmmaker, and we're talking a little bit about the Bronze Bomber, Deontay Wilder. I mean, yeah, it's a tiny bit premature because he's expected to still be fighting potentially. Yeah, that's up in the air. But I think it's safe to say that the bulk of his career is concluded. So I don't think that it's an unfair conversation to have about his legacy. But in any case, Bren, how goes it, dude?
It goes well. I agree. I mean, he hasn't, I think, given any indication he's going to retire, but he has lost four out of his last five fights, including June 1st, pretty savage
Yeah,
knockout.
the last two have been not good.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Not a whole lot good to take from them, you know?
no, it does not appear that things are going to improve in terms of his career or overall legacy. But I do think that this is a guy that has an extremely unusual legacy because his supporters, now that he's on the brink of retirement, hopefully for his own welfare, um, a lot of the supporters are saying Hall of Fame. You got to put him 5-year title reign, highest knockout ratio in heavyweight history, got to be in the Hall of Fame. And a lot of other people are saying, what is this resume that could possibly justify that? Is this one of the most overhyped heavyweights we've seen in a long time? Eddie Hearn last year referred to him as the most overrated fighter in all of boxing. So I think that's where the critics stand. And a number of writers have kind of come out and said, yeah, like, what is this resume? 2015, Shelley Finkel, his manager, when presented with a possible Klitschko fight, said, no, Deontay is a baby. We can't match that, almost as if he was still a prospect, even though he'd won a heavyweight title. So I think there's a lot there with Wilder. I mean, he's complicated. He's a messy character in the sport. He's made a ton of money, but at the same time, not been the most lucrative heavyweight on his own, despite being arguably by many the most dangerous puncher in heavyweight history, or at least a great puncher, one of the great weapons we've ever seen in boxing. So I definitely think he's an interesting person to discuss now that the career is hopefully over.
I think that you would hear some sort of high quality journalist at this point say he's a polarizing figure. Yes, that's not us, but I'm just saying some high quality journalist. But he is a polarizing figure because if you think about it, like you just mentioned a handful of his credentials, he's a bronze medalist at the Olympics. I mean, there's a respectable list of credentials, but you could ask 100 boxing fans and you'd get 50 saying, yeah, he's good, and 50 saying, that guy is absolute crap. That guy sucks, dude. Like, are you serious? And it's like, why? How could they both? What? Like that doesn't really kind of make sense. Like, how, you know what I mean? So I guess that's part of what we're trying to tackle a little bit today is talk about his legacy in a meaningful way or a way that's a little bit more clear as far as where does he stand? Does he belong in the Hall of Fame? Et cetera. What did he have a good career, or is this just all hype and manufactured? I mean, could it be a little bit of both?
I think he definitely occupies both extremes. I don't think even his biggest defenders would say this looks like one of the more skilled heavyweight champions we've ever seen. He looks like he's walking on stilts. He looks sort of like a baby deer on the surface of a frozen lake. He's just not the most coordinated fighter. Nobody has ever called Deontay Wilder smooth. Um, and I think he sort of represents to me sort of what the Detroit Lions were like in the 1990s. You have a Hall of Fame running back, arguably the greatest running back ever in Barry Sanders. Nobody ever said, and the rest of the team is an epic all-time NFL team. They're like, that guy, no question. But the team in boxing, we have to sort of conflate both of these dualities. is he sort of has Barry Sanders in his right hand, and everything else is the rest of the Detroit Lions. No great quarterback, no great receivers, no great defense, no great offensive line. It's the Barry Sanders show. So I feel like his supporters have kind of tried to make the argument that every team that Barry Sanders played on is one of the great teams. And instead, it's really Barry Sanders was great. Deontay Wilder definitely had a great right hand, but for everybody who looks at the career knockout percentage, you have to look at who he's knocking out. The moment he stepped up and fought a fighter who was in the top 10, let's say as voted by Ring Magazine, his knockout percentage shrinks. He did it 8 times, shrinks to 25%. So once the opponents can get out of the way of the punch, can throw back effectively, Deontay's skill level, I think, got dramatically exposed. And I don't think even now, physically, he's a depleted fighter. I think his willingness to take risks, to even just throw punches. I mean, my God, the last few punches, the last few fights he's had, like including against Parker, he didn't barely threw a punch round after round after round. And it's not like he's an overweight guy. I don't know quite what's going on, but looks so athletic. He doesn't look like a fighter. He looks like a basketball player physically. He's just so thin. He doesn't move like a fighter, but I would say he has always looked terrible. Terrible. He does everything wrong. And he even made the statement, to beat me, you have to fight a perfect fight. For me to beat you, I have to be perfect for 2 seconds. Because with that right hand, which is one of the most amazing things I've seen in the sport, live and watching him spar, it's really strange that he occupies both of these extremes, and yet he does. And I feel like people try to reconcile that instead of recognize he is a terrible boxer and he is a tremendous puncher. But I do think the resume is the thing we need to look at. And that resume, who deserves more credit for that? Wilder, for what he did against mediocre opposition. Like even in his 30th fight, he was fighting guys. One of them, I think, had 15 losses. Like that's how much confidence the people steering his career had that he might get exposed. And I think we've seen that once he steps up against Fury, against Ortiz. He's losing both of the Ortiz fights. I think you could argue against Fury, he lost almost every round where he didn't knock Fury down. And I think the big thing we got to talk about today is recency bias, because we've heard Wilder is one of the most dangerous heavyweights ever in heavyweight history. Tyson Fury is the greatest heavyweight of all time. Like you're hearing this a lot. And the moment Fury loses, Usyk might be the greatest heavyweight we've ever had, one of the great fighters of all time. It's just constant hyperbole. And I'm not saying these fighters are bad, but throwing that stuff around, I think it comes down to recency bias rather than we're seeing the greatest, what is it, the greatest era in sports history that boxing is offering us. I just don't see that with these guys. We lost more great fights than we got from these guys.
Unfortunately, yeah. Like that's a big part of what boxing is now. How fights are made, how fights are put together, how fighters are represented, and stuff like that. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of fighters ripen on the vine. A lot of fights kind of fall by the wayside. Can't be negotiated, or impossible fights to make and stuff like that, which is just nonsensical. And I mean, that it's not that that has always been the case in boxing. Obviously, the way that it happens is a somewhat new development. However, there have been fights that fell by the wayside forever. Fights that didn't happen when they should have, or fights that never happened that we missed, or whatever. Some fighter, oh, I declined to have this combat. Whatever the fuck you want to 1700s people were doing, but it's happened forever. However, it seems to be more like a hallmark in recent years that it's just to be expected that, well, there's simply going to be fights that can't happen. And Deontay Wilder is unfortunately one of the victims of that development. Uh, and that's just kind of how it is. Boxing fans, if they don't like that, or if Deontay Wilder fans don't like that, or something like that, I guess what you probably should do is step up and demand that change. And not to get too off topic, but that might be changing at least to some degree if there honestly is some sort of massive buyout or league or whatever created by homeboy excellency, you know what I'm saying? But uh I don't know. That's a bigger conversation, but nonetheless, for the time being, Deontay Wilder fell under the umbrella of, you know, that series of years where there's fights that are impossible to make and whatever. But what I was going to say, as far as going back a little bit, you brought up Deontay Wilder's athleticism and the fact that he kind of looks like a basketball player. I think at one point he was a basketball player, and I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that he
And
was doing like
football.
other athletics and stuff like that before he got into boxing. When I was looking at his overall career, I mean, I think that there's maybe almost a case to be made that winning the bronze medal at the Olympics with that small amount of experience almost was like a bad thing, because
Mm.
I think it almost like convinced him like, oh, well, like what you did to do that is what you should continue to do as a professional fighter. Because if you look at him in the Olympics, he looks the same. You know, there's hasn't really been all that much development. He looks basically the same fighter with not a whole lot of technique, throwing hard with, you know, every punch, just woof, woof, you know, type of thing. And it almost feels like, and that's not to say that he had the capacity to be a Ray Robinson or something like that, but it feels like that's where the development really stopped, because it was like, well, I got a bronze medal in the Olympics doing this, so why don't you shut up? Because that's, you know, it kind of feels like that's where it went. I could be wrong, but what do you think?
Well, he started late. That's something we need to take into account. This guy started 20, 21 years old, um, trying to raise money to look after a child who was ill with a massive disability, and just thought he was always a really hard worker when he was young, worked multiple jobs. That's a big part of his narrative, that he was very driven. And I think what gets overshadowed with his power is A, it distorts his legacy, that he seems much better than he is with these big dramatic knockouts, as opposed to, great fighters. Muhammad Ali, how great did he look against Ken Norton? He doesn't have that ability to just put people away the way that Wilder can rely on. I mean, he's quite right that if he's perfect for 2 seconds, he can put away anybody who's in front of him. And he definitely had the determination to do that. I think what gets overlooked is he had a lot of pride in who he was and what he was trying to accomplish. I think he was very driven to accomplish it. Definitely not somebody who ever was gaining weight in between fights, which with Tyson Fury and a number of other people. I mean, we forget now the first Tyson Fury fight, Fury was a cherry-picked opponent to showcase Wilder. I think Wilder was the favorite in that fight, but Fury was basically written off at that point. Out 3 years, balloons up to 400 pounds, probably addicted to cocaine, these horrible homophobic, sexist rants all the time. Like he was just becoming a sideshow, which kind of still is, but he still is. When he came back and made this tremendous recovery, was putting on great performances. He could always still perform when he got into the ring in such a tremendous way. Wilder, even when you knock him down, I mean, how many times have we now seen him knocked down? He always gets up. He is he is something very different than even other great champions who we venerate. Mike Tyson, behind just even him backing up, that's the end of the fight in his entire career. If you were backing Tyson up, he lost every single time. And Wilder, that's not true. This career could have been very different had he just got a little closer with one of these knockouts to put away knockdowns, I should say, with Fury. We'd be talking about him very differently. And it goes the other way too. Ortiz came extremely close in the seventh round of putting away Wilder, had him rocked. And there were a few punches that just missed putting him away completely. We would think totally differently about Wilder had he never had those Fury fights. There would be no discussion about Hall of Fame. And I think, I mean, I'm doing a piece right now for The Ring. I was looking at some comparables. And I mean, as a boxing historian, I mean, you tell me, do you see Wilder as a better fighter in terms of his career or his ability than the likes of Ron Lyle, Jerry Cooney, Ray Mercer, Andre Galata, Razor Ruddock, David Tua, Tommy Morrison? I mean, even Henry Akinwande, these were fighters where first you're like, none of these guys are in the Hall of Fame, but they beat fighters that were, I think, better quality than Wilder really was. Did Wilder ever beat fighters of their quality? I don't see who that is. Who are the great wins on Wilder's career? Ortiz twice, and getting a kind of gift draw against Fury. Find me the next best guy, and probably 95% of boxing fans have either never heard of him or don't in any way give him credence as a quality fighter. So Wilder's resume does not stand up to scrutiny terribly well if we're trying to be objective, as opposed to how his knockouts have made us feel.
Well, I think that the knee jerk reaction to saying something like that is somebody would say, well, then who did he duck? Tell me who he ducked. There's not a suggestion that he ducked somebody per se. And it has nothing to do with that. And on top of that, when you start saying stuff like that, there's the inherent suggestion that then you're saying somebody's afraid. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like we're going down like a wrong path with that type of shit.
Yeah.
The whole point is more, like just being, like you said, objective. I know it's tough, but if you look objectively at a lot of those fighters that you just named, and you're saying, like, is Deontay Wilder better in terms of resume or in terms of accomplishments than these fighters? And it's a difficult argument to make for Deontay Wilder, that is, because while he got in with most of the fighters that he should have, and he fought most of the fighters available, and I don't think that he necessarily avoided anybody per se. And a lot of the things that happened were, like I said, a combination of timing and the promotional fucking nonsense and stuff like that. Um, but he fought who he was supposed to fight for the most part. But you look at these other fighters, and almost every single one that you named, I mean, perhaps every single one that you named, defeated a fighter, regardless of where that fighter was in their career, that is a better fighter than anybody Deontay Wilder probably ever even faced, period. So I mean, it's tough, like, and a lot of people again are kind of look at like resumes and, wow, look at his knockout percentage, and or Deontay Wilder has 43 wins, this other guy has 30, so therefore, and we know it doesn't work that way. You got to look at the quality of opposition, etc. So I don't have like a hard answer whether or not he's better or worse or whatever, but I do think that it's easy to dismiss, right? Like, and I know that there are going to be people who listen to what you said and they're going to be like, "What, dude? Henry Akin fucking Wande? What are you talking about?" I'm just saying, go look at the resumes, and it's probably a closer argument than you think.
Well, and I would say another parallel we have in the 1990s, there was another 6'7" menacing heavyweight by the name of Michael Grant. Michael Grant, before he fought Lennox Lewis, fought David Izon, Obed Sullivan, Lou Savarese, and Andrew Galata. Compare that with anybody on Wilder's resume before he won the title in 2015. And what we're saying is, how much confidence do the people have who were overseeing the careers of these two guys, let's say Grant and Wilder? I think there was huge confidence in Grant that Grant could be an important heavyweight champion. He's so big, so athletic, so powerful. He's knocking out almost everybody and knocking out better competition than Wilder was. I think people were always concerned with the liabilities in Wilder that have always been apparent. You can go on YouTube, you can watch him as an amateur getting his head taken off in a fight. He was knocked down by a jab that didn't count as a jab early in his career by a morbidly obese opponent. Also on YouTube, you can watch it. The ref didn't count it. But there was a sense, I think, with Wilder, like, we need to be careful. And that's not a bad thing. Like, that's a smart thing, because he made probably well over $100 million because he didn't get his head taken off by potentially better quality opposition. If you think about somebody like Errol Spence, everybody had him as a pound for pound great champion of his time, right? The moment he gets in there against Crawford, he takes the fight that everybody wants him to have, gets destroyed by, I think Crawford was what, 38 years old, 37, 38 years old, already past his prime, annihilates Spence. And I personally think Spence, there's no way he could be the same fighter he was after the accident that he survived. That had to take something away from him. But let's put that aside. When they get in there and Crawford so violently outclasses him, there's no way to look at Spence the same way. And I'm not saying I don't think he doesn't deserve all the accolades he's got, or like he was protected or anything like that. He was a superb champion. But the moment you lose like that, when you're humiliated by being so outclassed, the rest of your career trajectory, the rest of your earning potential is irrevocably damaged, is fucked, is limited. And with Wilder, even though he was knocking everybody out, he still was never that marketable unless he was really fighting somebody that we thought was a dangerous opponent. And I think it's also one of the reasons why Wilder resorted to a lot of the hyperbole of this cartoonish character stuff, the bomb squad, and pandering to some of the worst impulses of the sport in terms of he wanted a body on his resume, like openly bragging about wanting to kill somebody in the ring. I don't think that's the real him. I think it was just him trying to, like, what can I do to get people to care? He even when I went in 2018 to profile him, there was no real American media covering him. There was only one other American journalist who was at his gym in the lead up to the first Fury fight. The rest were British journalists who'd flown over
I
on
believe
Fury's
that.
behalf.
I
It
believe
was,
that.
it was all of them. And they all said the same thing as we watched him on the last couple of days of his sparring. If he doesn't knock Fury out, he is going to lose every round. And they weren't saying it with glee. It was just he was getting totally outclassed by the three sparring partners who were meant to represent Fury. They're all big, tall guys. They were trying to fight like Fury, but he looked terrible. And it was one of the weirdest. I would say he's the most unskilled champion I've seen at anything, not just boxing, that I've ever been around. It is as amazing to watch how unskilled he is as it is to watch him throw that right hand and what it can do. Like even him missing that right hand, it was sort of like what they said about Babe Ruth. Like the most exciting thing in sports in Ruth's day was him hitting a home run, and the next was him striking out. Wilder had that kind of effect. Like even when he would miss a right hand, audiences would roar the way they usually would reserve for somebody else knocking somebody out because you could just feel the menace of it. So I think Wilder himself got kind of distorted by how important he was, and probably there was a lot of insecurity there too. But I think that his management was smart enough to recognize that the insecurity was legitimate and he needed to be protected. And so they tried to play up the hype and that sort of thing. But I think had he fought high level competition early, he would have been exposed much earlier, and he would have been nowhere near those other fighters we're comparing him to, including a Henry Akinwande. I think even if he fought Akinwande 10 times, Akinwande probably wins 5 or 6 of those fights. I mean, Akinwande was far more skilled, far more skilled.
The Lennox Lewis fight was so bad that and the outcome so poor that people forget that he was a good fighter before and even after that.
Yeah.
But I get it because that's getting disqualified for refusing to let go of your opponent. That's a bad look. But the Michael Grant comparison is I think where the recency bias comes into play because obviously we've had now 25, 30 years to assess the career of Michael Grant and kind of understand, get a better look, hindsight, all that type of stuff. And of course, I think you look at those opponents and stuff like that with Michael Grant and you say, well, Lou Savarese, why are you telling me about Lou Savarese? Bro, Lou Savarese came kind of out of nowhere. And this was when George Foreman was the lineal heavyweight champion and, given up the belts and shit like that. Gave George Foreman a far harder time than literally anybody was expecting. And
Yep.
fucking, and on top of that, he had, I think it was either right before or right after that. I can't remember the exact timing, but he defeated Buster Douglas when Buster Douglas was on his comeback. And I mean, not a super, especially in hindsight, not an unexpected result. But the point is that Michael Grant was seen as definitely challenging himself with these fights leading up to. So, anyway, just to illustrate your point as far as the confidence behind the people who were putting Michael Grant out there and the people who were putting Deontay Wilder out there, because Deontay Wilder wasn't out there for a large chunk of his career. He wasn't on TV almost at all. And if, like, the fight that you mentioned, I can't remember the opponent off the top of my head, but if you look at the fights from around that time in his pro career, a lot of them are like high school gym looking type of settings and shit like that, which you don't see a whole lot of these days.
No,
Not
and I
on
mean, look,
fighters that level anyway.
no, no, no. And I mean, look at David Tua, what he did against John Ruiz. Who did that to John Ruiz for the rest of his career? Like Ruddock had some notable victories. Ruddock gave Tyson everything that Tyson wanted in those two fights. That was a very young, still relatively prime Tyson. Galata gave Bo. I mean, as good as you want to say Bo was, I don't even know that Holyfield really took as much out of him as Galata did. Galata was totally dominating both of those fights with Bo. Bo showed huge courage to come back, to stay in there. But Mercer, another guy, devastating. And I mean, how would Michael Grant do in this era? Like, that's another thing. It's like Grant was powerful. If Grant could get to you with those huge arms and,
Well,
and his
and he
athleticism.
used to be the poster boy for years and years. People were like, "That's the crappy heavyweight," and now we're looking
Yeah.
back like, that was the crappy.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. No, and I just think we have to be careful because if Mike Tyson retires after Michael Spinks, I think most people now would be hailing him as the greatest fighter ever by far. I think would be sort of the thought. Or Roy Jones doesn't, like, after he wins the heavyweight championship, if he retires at that point undefeated, how do we see him
Well, not
compared to all,
undefeated, but close
not
to it.
undefeated, but really undefeated? I mean,
Yeah,
like,
in the hearts and minds of the people.
yeah, I mean, he deserved to be disqualified, but in terms of was he going to win that fight, I don't think anybody has
He
ever
he came
said,
about as close to erasing that loss as one could come to erasing a loss.
yeah. And part of the reason why Roy Jones was never all that marketable was when he had that rematch and showed you his absolute apex, he
He brought out
apologized for
RJ.
having to fight that way.
He brought out
Like,
RJ.
yeah, he put an RJ, but he said, I don't want to do that. Don't make me do that.
Yeah,
It's like,
RJ doesn't want to come out, but you forced him to
yeah.
come out.
And it was like, that was one of the most amazing knockouts I've ever seen. I mean, his athleticism was at such a level. But but yeah, I think once Roy gets tarvered and then those other losses that happen after, it just raises question after question after question about how good was he? Okay, his athleticism, but how much skill was really there as a foundation? I mean, look at Bernard Hopkins as he got older. That foundation kept him at such a high level. So it's not an unfair thing to raise, but if you don't take those risks, I mean, once Floyd had autonomy, how much risk was he willing to take in his career fighting guys when we wanted to see him have it? So you could criticize him for that, or you could say that's the smart thing to do because the moment he loses once, his greatest marketing campaign is I'm undefeated. That makes me better than all the other great fighters in history. Just arbitrarily seizes on one thing. But how many of those great fights of Floyd Mayweather, where he's making all that money, are we rewatching because they were such fun fights? That wasn't his style. His style was to mitigate risk as much as possible in the ring and who he selected and when he selected them. Brilliant. But should we commend it? I don't know. And I mean, Wilder is another one that's similar in a sense in terms of distorting perception because he had one of the most exciting trilogies in the history of heavyweight boxing with Fury. I mean, you would agree with that?
Gosh,
Exciting.
I mean, yeah, I mean, well, it's like you kind of said before. Wilder, for the most part, lost every round. He didn't get a knockout, lockdown in. Excuse me. But those rounds where that happened was like, holy shit. Yeah,
Amazing.
I mean, it was thrilling.
Thrilling. So was Arturo Gatti, you know, having one of the most memorable trilogies of all time. How important was it relative to boxing greats, of greatness in boxing? Not that important. Arturo Gati's in the Hall of Fame against, and how much of Mickey Ward and their trilogy is responsible for that. If the Hall of Fame is about, this is something you and I talked about privately, if it is about generating excitement and bringing fans to the sport, thrilling us, providing us with great memories, nothing wrong with that. Or is it about excellence? Is it about greatness? Is that what we're trying to decipher? There's no strict, like you and I have both voted in the Boxing Hall of Fame. Like, I mean, it's what do you personally respond to? It doesn't say it needs to be this that I'm aware of, but it does feel as if why we're voting, how we're voting is changing over time.
Yeah.
So, Wilder Fury, is it one of the most important trilogies? I guess it depends how you perceive the two guys fighting. And for a while there, I mean, Fury's another guy whose resume is not really that deep. What are his great victories? Now that he's lost to Usyk, like, you kind of go, maybe he wasn't one of the great heavyweights of all time. I would hope so. I also am not suggesting that Usyk is the greatest heavyweight ever or whatever, despite amazing achievements as a fighter, an amazing fighter. But a lot of this is way more subjective than I think we're willing to admit. And I love the trilogy of Fury Wilder. It's one of my favorite series of fights that I watched and that I rewatch. But I think Wilder is one of the most overhyped, protected heavyweight champions in history. And I also think Fury is a very mixed bag, as we saw when he fights, in Saudi Arabia against somebody that's never had a professional fight. That was not the most inspiring moment. And yeah, he didn't train for it or whatever, but Fury has had his
Well,
moments
that's on
too.
him. I
That's on
mean,
him. Yeah, he's not that disciplined. I mean, he's also massive mental health issues, substance abuse. He's erratic. And I did not enjoy when he loses to Usyk, the excuses he's coming up with. I was having too much fun. I mean, we want to get to the master of excuses, eroding the reputation of a fighter. Let's look at Wilder Fury, the excuses of the loss. Do you remember all of our favorite issues from this fight?
yeah, I mean, because some of them still get brought up.
Referee favoritism. How do you feel about that? The Kenny Bayless factor, a notoriously favorite.
Well, let me look real quick. And who was all right? So the first was Jack Reese. Jack Reese is usually, for the most part, pretty fair. Kenny Bayless is usually pretty shit. But I don't necessarily think he had anything to do with that fight. And Russell Mora is usually a pretty shitty referee, so I'm not going to go there. But no, I don't think the referee really determined the outcome of any of these fights. Really, I mean, like, dude, it wasn't
No,
like the rounds were like super difficult to score. Like, oh, the actions nip and tuck. You know what I'm saying? Like, why is the referee separating them all the time? Like, I don't remember thinking that.
no. I think the only person who really raised a serious protest about Kenny Bayless in that fight was what's his name? Deontay Wilder.
Oh yeah,
So
that guy. Yeah.
yeah, that guy. So if we follow Gandhi's adage that to a minority of one truth is truth, then I guess he's right. And it was favoritism of why he lost. I personally don't subscribe to that. So we'll say number two excuse, injured bicep.
I don't know. Could have been true, but
Would have been true.
there's also the old issue of, and not to downplay injuries, but like, if I think most fighters will tell you this, like pretty much nobody fights healthy ever.
Well, Wilder was quoted saying everything that happened related to the bicep happened the last 15 minutes until the fight. There's a lot of things that went on. There's a lot of things that I don't even want to talk about at this moment in time. I'm still reflecting on certain things, and I can't believe the things that happened to me. And they happened to me at that point in my career.
Illuminati.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. Most famous excuse, of course, the heavy costume. He comes in this Pride Parade, Skeletor inspired thing. I don't understand why this is a thing, just like I don't particularly understand the bomb squad being screamed all the time. I don't know how much that caught on. The times I've seen him fight live, it did not seem to really, you know, excite fans particularly or set us on fire with anticipation. But the heavy costume where he is in this sort of weird decrepit skull with a crown and it's illuminated in this kind of weird way. It was a heavy costume and he wore that costume into the ring and that took a lot out of him.
I mean, it did legitimately look large and cumbersome and difficult to walk in. I'll give him that, but it was also his choice to wear that shit. So, I mean, look, if there was some shit that weighed 50 pounds and you had to walk around with it for like 10 minutes or something like that, yeah. I mean, to like a normal person, you're like 50 pounds. No, that shit'll fucking weigh on you, bro. For real. I'm not kidding. But he chose to wear that shit. So it's kind of like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's your, I don't know, buddy. I love you, but no.
Well, and I mean, if I have any intellectual deficits today, I just want to explain. I carried the groceries home yesterday. They were at least 40 pounds, which was Wilder's allegation about the costume. I did carry them probably about 6 blocks from up the street,
But if you
and
carried them in one hand and it starts like cinching your finger, that can fuck you up, bro.
it did, and it did, and
Get
my
all
shoulders are a
purple and
little bit
shit.
sore. It did. My cats woke me up at 2 this morning to be fed. Came back at 6 a.m. again to wake me up a
It's
second
legit.
time.
It's legit.
I mean, if I'm losing to Tyson Fury, I'm straight to the cats.
Meow, meow.
Yeah. My favorite one, my favorite excuse, even more than the costume, even though the costume, I get why everybody, that's their favorite. My trainer betrayed me. Mark Breland, by throwing in the towel, betrayed him.
Oh,
How do you feel
man.
about
You know,
Mark Breland, somebody who everybody in boxing hates and says has no integrity? Breland has Wilder is not the first person to impugn the character of Mark Breland. No, and I'm being totally sarcastic. Breland is one of the most beloved people in the sport, and this was just so outlandish and gutless.
on one level, and I'm not trying to be an apologist at all. I'm just trying to see, excuse me, from Deontay Wilder's perspective. Um, I expect just about any high level athlete. So like when people get angry that like an athlete says like I'm the greatest of all time, like any whoever it is, I'm kind of like, are you really that upset that a high level athlete thinks highly of themselves? Like that's what they need. That's why they're a high level athlete. Me sitting here having doubts about myself and not understanding about my fucking own psyche. That's why I'm me and I'm not fucking world class something something. That's the whole point. And basically, so on one hand, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm not surprised that somebody's trying to look for an excuse or looking for their trainer or specifically getting mad that their trainer stopped a fight when their entire philosophy is like, do not stop this fight. I need them to kill me. Like, if you do not stop this fight. And again, I'm not agreeing with that, but I'm just saying, like, I get it. However, that being said, yeah, Mark Breland, I've never met him but from what I understand, he's like a super sweetheart guy. He was a scary fighter, lanky, kind of like Deontay Wilder, one of the greatest amateurs of all time, without question. But and a very, very good pro too. So
Yeah,
that being,
two-time world champion.
yeah, yeah, like it's people are like, oh, he was an underachiever, bro. He was a really good pro too.
Right.
That being said, I've heard he's all just a really nice dude. Do I think he did the right thing? Of course, like making sure that his fighter doesn't actually get killed in the. Of course, he stopped it when he should have. But yeah, I get why Wilder would be upset, but it's unreasonable
And
to
I,
put it
and I
lightly.
and I would add, I'm not a doctor, but spending time around Breland when I was in Wilder's camp, Breland gives some indication in his speech and in his movement that he suffered injuries from his boxing career. You can see it. You can hear it when he talks, when he moves, he kind of drags his foot in a way. He he is living with the consequences of a
A
career
lot of
that
amateur fights. Yeah.
a lot of amateur fights, a lot of sparring,
Yeah.
especially the way they
Couple
sparred
bad
back then.
knockouts as a pro. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Once they got to him, he suffered. That empathy for the person that he's in charge of protecting should not be criticized. And and if anything, when Wilder got his a rematch with Fury and was allowed to keep going, how well did that go for him? You'd think that you would appreciate that this person wants to protect you, and
Well, and he
instead
got what he wanted. I
he got
guess
what
in
he
the
wanted.
third fight, he got laid out, which is
Yeah,
what he wanted, but
it's great.
but
Yeah,
but also more to what you were talking about with the more recent fights, how much do the results and how he's acted in those recent fights have to do with the fact that he now knows he will get laid out. Like it wasn't had nothing to do with the trainer saving him, nothing. The dude
that's
laid him
true.
out.
That's absolutely true. And I think we saw that with Fury and Usyk. The moment Fury was coming forward, gave him his best chance to win, gave him his biggest chance to also get knocked out. So he was unwilling to do it. And he was facing somebody that I think had more determination to win and take risks than he did. And ultimately, he didn't step up. I give him full courage for stepping up to Wilder, and I'm not taking anything away from Fury. I'm just saying that's why there are levels. That's why Usyk just showed you he's at a different level than Fury. Wherever you thought Fury was, Usyk is more of a human being and more of a fighter than that. And that was totally demonstrated in their fight. The other thing that I not just criticizing Breland for throwing in the towel because it was the wrong thing to do and I told him not to do it and all of that. He went further.
Yeah,
He
that's
said
true. Yeah, no, this one's
he
good.
accused him of being part of a conspiracy that he was working with the Fury camp. No evidence
Yeah,
whatsoever that that's true. But then you're calling in his integrity into question with no evidence so that any prospective future employment after you fire him and throw him under the bus for your shitty performance or your good performance that just got dominated by a better fighter, that's fucking bullshit. I mean, Wilder deserves a lot of criticism for that, I
wasn't
think.
there some point where he had suggested that Breland had given him something as well?
Yeah, I think
Like, I don't
yeah,
want to make that
well,
up, like,
you're
but I'm
jumping
pretty sure
ahead,
he did.
Patrick. Patrick,
Sorry,
you're
my bad,
jumping
my
ahead.
bad.
We'll leave, we'll leave, we'll leave the Breland throwing under the bus.
Yeah,
Next
there's
excuse.
more. No, there's more.
Oh, there's two more. Wilder's water was spiked, and you're absolutely right. Um,
Yeah, that's
Breland,
definitely going a level beyond.
about 15 minutes before going out to the fight, warming up with on the mitts, I was fucking about to put a hole in the mitts. Wilder told 78 Sports TV. You tell me what the hell 78 Sports TV is. It was perfect. I felt great. I was going in until I went into the ring. That transformation from the point of leaving my dressing room and going into the ring, drinking certain water and stuff. What stuff?
Fucking Four Loco. I
Just
don't fucking know.
trying to keep myself hydrated and stuff, more stuff like that. I just started feeling weird. So spiked water. I mean, I love that it's not just the one thing. It's not just, oh, I was depleted my energy from being Skeletor on
It's
I
the old scatter shot, fucking bird
it's
shot,
just
fucking see what goes.
yeah. So spiked water with no evidence. So
Yeah,
you
Mark
were
Breland committing felonies now.
yeah, Mark Breland is Panama Lewis for what reason exactly? Panama, like Breland doesn't have an incentive for his guy to win where he's getting a percentage of this guy's checks and wants it to keep going well, or he wants him to lose for $5,000 so then he can never work again in anybody's corner for breaking the
Yeah,
law.
absolutely ruin his life and reputation. Oh my goodness.
Oh boy. Okay, so our final of our favorite top excuses. Tyson Fury's Tyson Fury's gloves were loaded.
Well, actually, and more specifically, what the so I have seen this a lot. And by so just in case anybody is watching or listening and they're not understanding, this is not, I'm not bragging. I don't care about that at all. I'm simply illustrating so you understand how much boxing content I view on a daily basis and I don't want to. So I run the boxing history accounts, right? And I do have to monitor them. And when I post about Tyson Fury, inevitably every single time somebody will reply or try to reply with photos of his gloves with the green gloves looking all weird and saying, with like big red fucking circles, like, what is this? Type of shit. I've seen it so much that like this and the costume are the most lasting excuses, 100%. 100%. And I've seen every single weird video angle with the red circles and all sorts of shit. And I mean, yeah, and it's not even that he had loaded gloves. The charge is that they removed padding from Tyson Fury's gloves because if you do look at some of the photos and afterwards and shit, I don't know how much people know about gloves, and I'm not trying to get into a big boxing fucking lesson about how gloves are made, but the padding inside the gloves moves around like during the fight, before the whatever, like the gloves are kind of flexible. They're not rigid or whatever. They're not made out of stone. Some of them have horse hide, some of them have synthetic shit now, blah blah blah. Heavyweights and really large heavyweights like Tyson Fury have to get custom gloves made. Their hands don't fit in normal size gloves. So when the custom gloves get made, sometimes the manufacturing is weird. That's not to make excuses, but that's just one, that's true. That's factual. And so in any case, what I think wound up happening is that some of the padding shifted around in the fucking gloves as he's wearing the gloves, and it looks weird. They have inspections and people fucking signing off on this shit all day long, bro. And yes, I am aware that there have been fucking scandals with removed padding, like Panama Lewis and fucking Luis Resto, Billy Collins. I'm aware of Antonio Margarito with the fucking, reused knuckle pad shit. It wasn't plaster. Everybody calm down. Go fucking read a book about it, for Christ's sake. But I'm aware that it's happened, but the idea of it happening all the time is like not legitimate. And this is such a weird fucking conspiracy to hang on when the guy is like beating the other dude's ass for the vast majority of the fight. Man, it's bothersome.
Well, we live in a country, I think at last, there was a poll not long ago, a quarter of Americans believe that the sun goes around the earth currently.
At this point, I'm kind of shocked it's not more,
Yeah.
like
So to quote our esteemed champion, I highly believe you put something, the grammar is just always like, I highly believe you, I'll clean it up. I highly believe you put something in your glove, something the size and the shape of an egg weight. It's the reason why the side of my face swelled up in an egg weight form. What's the form of an egg weight? And it left a dent in my face as well. So he's swelling and denting simultaneously. That's an interesting trick. But in the midst of it all, you still couldn't keep this king down.
you'd
You
break
would
the
have
fuck
had
out of your
killed me.
hand.
Yeah. In the end, it took a crab in the bucket referee and a disloyal trainer to throw the towel in just to stop me.
Grabbing a bucket is definitely like a southern ass phrase. That's good shit. Uh
Crab in the bucket.
that doesn't even, yeah, that doesn't even make sense. Like the he's trying to suggest that Kenny Bayless is somebody who has escaped from a small town and is being pulled. I don't know what that means at all, but yeah, the egg weight not legitimate. Fighters are not putting things in their hands and punching because you'd break the fuck out of your hand. You wouldn't even be able to throw a punch real well if you had shit in your hand. Come on. No, I'm dismissing these ones.
Well, I just think
Dismissed.
it could be all of these things, or he just lost. He lost to a better fighter.
Yeah,
And
let's go with what's the most likely. What's the
yeah,
simplest?
yeah. I mean, I just you just rewatch the fight, and it's sort of like,
So
he was out.
here's the question though. So just so that it's not like we're just making fun of the excuses that he made because he got his ass beat. What do the excuses do for his legacy? You know what I'm saying? Like do you feel like making excuses? So after the first fight was tedious in a lot of spots. You know,
Yeah.
Tyson Fury obviously knew how to stifle Deontay Wilder, but then he in for like 2 or 3 rounds got his ass kicked. And so the first fight's a draw. A lot of people thought Fury should have won closely, whatever, doesn't matter. But then they rematch. Deontay Wilder gets his shot, loses, makes a shitload of excuses. What does that weigh on his legacy?
I mean, for me, it would. I mean, I'm no longer a member of the Boxing Writers of America Association or Hall of Fame voter. I just stopped caring about that. I don't particularly need to participate. If I was voting, yeah, I think it's shitty on his legacy. I do think calling out a Mark Breland is a mark against you. I don't think you do that unless you have concrete evidence. And clearly he's looking for any excuse he can possibly find. And look at the extent to which he has to reach and where he has to reach to do it, rather than to take any accountability for just losing. Like look at Errol Spence. Who did Errol Spence even mention the car accident for losing to Crawford? Never brought it up. Better man won today. Class act, owns it. I'm gonna try to do better next time. I don't know if I can win. Like, I just like that kind of behavior, that sort of sportsmanship. And with Wilder, I feel like you want to kill a man in terms of how menacingly I want my brand to be. I don't like that kind of talk. I don't think that's good for the sport or good for anybody. Anybody who's lost somebody in this sport to dying, uh, that's a bad look. But also then when you lose, that you resort to this kind of thing, impugning the character of your trainer, a very venerable referee, the way that the fight was organized in terms of, like you were saying, like getting his glove checked and all of that. Everybody is against Deontay Wilder. Okay. So I just think Wilder, like a lot of people who come across as arrogant or they talk about their big ego, is nothing to do with ego. It's just massive insecurity. And I think Wilder got swept up that he was sort of the deliverance of God's instrument in boxing. There was a lot of invoking God about that he was on a higher power was carrying him to importance. And I just think you're not that important. You're an overhyped champion who was smartly protected. You're a devastating puncher and a very limited one-dimensional fighter. And your resume is pretty shitty. Like I don't even know when we talk about the great fighters of the era, Fury, Wilder, AJ Usyk, I guess the next best would probably be Parker in terms of resume. I don't think Wilder rises above even Parker. And I don't think much of Parker. I just think Wilder has sunk below that now, because I think he could have got lucky against Fury. I don't know if it's luck. I mean, it's his big attribute is he can put people away. He doesn't have much else. I mean, he's sort of like the opposite of Paulie Malignaggi. I mean, who would Paulie Malignaggi be if he was a great puncher? I bet he almost certainly would have been a Hall of Fame fighter. He didn't have that asset. He could never come back in a fight by putting somebody away. So he had to rely on other assets that he had, because that liability was bad hands and not much power to begin with. Wilder's the exact opposite. So I would never vote him into the Hall of Fame. It would influence certainly the shitty sportsmanship and his shitty character, calling people out. But I don't know what basis. Like again, like his best, I think, case for making it into the Hall of Fame is that he was a heavyweight champion for a longer reign than Joe Frazier, Rocky Marciano, some big names. But who did he fight to maintain it? Did he want to fight Klitschko when he had an opportunity to do so in 2015? They didn't want anything to do with it. Anything to do with it. I think Klitschko would have annihilated Wilder. So I think Wilder. I am more on the negative side of reading into his career, but I give him full credit for, I mean, having one of the best offensive weapons in the history of the sport. I think that's fair. I just think his liabilities were such that if he fought skilled competition, he would have routinely been exposed, as he was, because the moment he stepped up in competition to fight even top 10 fighters, his knockout percentage goes to almost nothing. He's not putting himself in a position to deliver that punch when people can get away from it and when people can hit back and hurt him. And they did.
When it comes to heavyweights, the people who handle them or guide them are generally going to err on the side of moving them too fast because it makes more money to strike fast and hard. It makes more sense financially to get everything you can out of that fighter. Viewing them as simply a commodity and not a human being, you know what I'm saying? Like from a business sense. And so the fact that that did not happen with Deontay Wilder, as you were suggesting earlier, I think is a good indicator of where these people who were guiding him thought he was as a fighter at that time. And that dictated much of his career in terms of, the expectations and how he was matched, etc. As far as where I stand on him, I mean, I don't think I'm quite as negative per se. And I do think that there is the argument, like you and I kind of spoke about, away from the show. There is the argument that similar to like a Paul Malignaggi or some other fighter who's just did not have a lot of punching power, Miguel Canto or somebody. Um, I almost tend to give them a little extra credit because they were able to pull something off without having a really major tool.
I totally agree. Totally agree.
And I think that that also, to some degree, can be applied to Deontay Wilder, where he was able to get very far in the sport and in a tough division, or at least especially is not a very big heavyweight as far as being, like built large or sturdy or whatever. He was able to get really far without having a full skill set and tool set. And there's something to say for that. But it's not the same thing being not quite as skilled or not having power. Like that punching power is a really helpful element of the sport. And that puts you at a much greater advantage,
Especially as a heavyweight. Like
as
that's
especially as
intriguing
a
to me.
heavyweight. And
Like,
especially as somebody who can bridge that gap as not a very big heavyweight of being somebody who weighs like 210 or something like that. And you're fucking clean cold cock and somebody who's 270. Like that's, are there any flyweights who are knocking out light heavyweights? No. So
yeah.
it that's a lot. There's a lot to say for that, no question. So when you kind of balance that out a little bit, yeah, dude, I mean, those big moments for Deontay Wilder in his biggest fights and his biggest step ups or whatever, he either failed or almost failed in some of those moments, like against Luis Ortiz, who was a very good fighter and whatnot. But I think that he clearly showed Deontay Wilder that below a certain level, below that kind of like top five ish level, there's a really good chance he was going to knock you cold. Like top five and below or so, really good chance. Above that, not a great chance.
I think it's kind of like I remember like Yasiel Puig coming into Major League Baseball, where like certain guys, I think the Toronto Blue Jays had a guy, Carlos Delgado, when I was a kid, and you pitch a fastball at him, he's hitting it out of the park. Like every second pitch, he's hitting out of the park. And as soon as they moved it to a curveball, he just couldn't hit it to save his life. And there's this big struggle. Some hitters are like that. They have the one pitch that limited guys can't do anything else, and you're just going to just crack out. You're going to be on a record-setting pace for home runs, and then you're going to step up to pitchers who'll
Yeah,
be like, "Oh,
pitcher
you can
just
hit."
can't get it around in time. You're gonna crank it every time. But
That's it.
somebody with movement,
And again, when we're talking about Ortiz, Ortiz was a very good fighter. I totally agree. When did he fight him the first time? He was 38 years old. So
Well, and
let's
like many of the many great Cuban heavyweights, unfortunately, just far too late in their career to really do anything, or
absolutely.
far too undisciplined, or whatever, some combination.
And all those people who love to throw out with the Cuban fighters that they're 20 years older than they actually are, then he looks even worse against Ortiz.
Seriously,
If King Kong is 60 years old and almost beating Deontay Wilder, how good does that make your Deontay Wilder? So, and to your point in terms of skill level, that was something that I really thought about as I was watching him spar. I couldn't believe how awful he looked. And Breland was watching. So I went over to Breland. Breland's got his arms across his chest. He's watching. And I just asked, when did they start boxing for the first time? The two of them. Breland was like, oh, he 19 the first time he put on a pair of gloves. What about you, Mark? He said he was 8. And I was like, when you're watching this guy who's been heavyweight champion for all these years, what level is he at technically to where you were? And Breland sort of smiled. Breland's a very humble guy, but he also didn't want to duck the question. I could tell he wanted to
yeah, he
because
ain't
he
gonna lie.
and he was watching. He was like, he's at about where I was at 11. And I was like, 11. And he said, yeah, but you have to remember he's a heavyweight in today's era. And you've seen how he can punch. If you can bang, that's enough now. And you've seen what his right hand can do. And
He's totally right, and that's saying a lot.
totally right. And on both counts is what we're saying is that's how limited Wilder is, and it's emblematic of how limited the era is. Breland knows his shit. And when Breland is assessing all of the potential threats that are out there, he's not just talking about how limited Wilder is. I think he's also telling us, as we're seeing now with what happened to Fury, I think if you match up Wilder 10 times against Fury, how many times does he win? What about what about AJ? How did AJ's stock change after he beat Klitschko, a 40-year-old Klitschko? Compared to how do you feel about him when Ruiz beats him? And even when they had the rematch, how terrified he was to really engage with Ruiz based on the first fight. Even though that was a Ruiz that was way more out of shape, he still was scared. He's still been marked by what happened in that first humiliation. So I think, how does Usyk do against these guys if he fights them 10 times? I don't know that it's the strongest era. I know that in terms of marketing where these guys were some years ago when they were all undefeated, every way you could like permutation you could match them would have made everybody a pile of money. How many of those fights did we get out of these 4? We got a few. We got a handful, but we should have had way more.
Yeah, we should add more.
Go back to the 90s and watch like how many great fights there were there. We definitely missed a bunch. I would have loved to have seen Foreman fight more guys or Bo fight more great champions. Holyfield fought everybody, but I have my prejudices against Holyfield. But I just mean you got some really great fights in that era. I think it was a lot easier with where politics were in the sport to get the fights when we wanted them to happen. I mean, today, would you ever have got David Tua against John Ruiz that early in their careers? Never. They never would have allowed it because I think it permanently is going to hamper the loser his earning potential for the rest of his career. I mean, John Ruiz still, I think, is probably remembered more, probably most being a boring fighter, the quiet man. I mean, what a nickname. Like, how do you get that nickname if you're remotely exciting? Second is the most boring fighter to be a champion, first Latino champion, Puerto Rican champion. And the next is being an iconic knockout from David Tua in like 10 seconds. And Larry Merchant just screaming, whoa, sort of thing. So do you want that attached to your legacy? Because it's very sticky. And I think with Wilder, I hope there will be more perspective about how we overhyped him. And I think what Usyk did to Fury, and especially in the rematch, if he does it again, you're going to understand more that maybe Fury wasn't the great fighter you thought. And I'm not saying he isn't a great fighter. I'm just saying maybe he isn't the greatest fighter because he had a trilogy with Deontay Wilder. That's kind of our point, I think.
Well, and to kind of cap off there too, I agree. As far as the quality of opposition and the matchups, but the last point also I think I'd want to make is just that as far as the actual fighting itself, um, you can get through this era in heavyweight and the last era, and most likely the era before that as well, without any sort of knowledge of knowing how to fight on the inside or body punching.
Yeah,
And
I think Riddick Bowe
that
would have
sounds
killed
crazy,
these.
right? Like that
Oh, you're
sounds
right.
crazy. Like though that sounds like a sweeping generalization that somebody's going to listen to and go like, he's wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Who? Who? Or if I'm Teddy, who against who against who? You know. But no, for real. Like there's Alexander Usyk is a fantastic body puncher and a good inside fighter. Beyond him, there are not a lot. There aren't a lot, and you don't need to. That's the thing. Is that, and I'm not blaming anybody. It's not like Emmanuel Stewart's fault. It's the fault. It's fart fucking. It's not Emmanuel Stewart's fault. It's not Lennox Lewis's fault. But they did seem to kind of figure out that, like, if you're at a certain height and you can develop a certain skill set and a really good jab, you can basically jab and grab your way through fights. And I'm not saying that's what Lennox did through his whole career, but that in a lot of situations you can win
He
fights
did.
that way. And Vladimir Klitschko basically maximized that shit.
Same blueprint. Yep, you're absolutely right.
And I'm not saying that everybody does it, but who is a good inside fighter and who is implementing that, who's body punching? Not a lot of people. And Deontay Wilder falls into that era. You put Deontay Wilder in like the 1970s, bro, he's getting chopped in half. Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? Come on, guys. You
And
know, like
I mean, the other thing too is I think all four of these guys currently that we're talking about, I think Vitaly Klitschko just fucking annihilates all of them. I think like even more than his brother, who is a better athlete. But in terms of the tools that Vitaly Klitschko had, like had he been coming up in this era, whew, and the guts he had too. I mean,
and he was, yeah, and he
rewatch the
was
Lennox
tough
Lewis.
enough. He was tough enough and had a good enough chin that is some of Deontay Wilder's, best attributes here might not have done the job against somebody like that. So,
No, I
just
think I think he was meaner and a way harder puncher than Fury. I mean, Fury had more weight, obviously being that big, but in terms of his willingness to go offensive against guys, to really fight to take you out, and to do it in a technical way too. I mean, hands down, and just throw at me. And if you miss, I'm gonna fucking take your head off. I think Vitali would have. I don't see what Usyk could have done against Vitali. I just think he's too big and too skilled and too strong, frankly. And I think Usyk's a great fighter and so technical and so much determination and courage. I don't think he could offset the skill level of Vitali. And I think all these guys. I mean, I like AJ too. AJ's very fun to watch, but uh, there's big limitations. And especially after losing that fight, I don't think his heart is there anymore. I just think he's aware of what can happen and he can't get that out of his head.
yeah, he's in
So
his own head now.
he is. And I get it. It's perfectly reasonable. It's getting a few concussions in your career, you can get a hint of how it's going to affect you the rest of your life. And we're learning more and more that it will. And how do people deal with that? Well, if you intend to live to an old age, it can be kind of scary. And I don't know. I think I like leaving on this point that it's not just about Wilder. If you're overestimating Wilder, you are also overestimating this era of heavyweights. And maybe we need a little bit of time before we can sort of recontextualize them. But I think you're absolutely right. Going back to the 70s, I mean, I don't, even though it's kind of a cliche, like if you can go to a different sport, you're going to go to a different sport than boxing. You're probably way better off to do it, and that has a consequence when we're not getting fed the best athletes in the country anymore. Like people who go into boxing go there because there's nowhere else to go for the most part. Klitschko's an exception to that, but otherwise, I don't know. And now Would you rather be a linebacker or a power forward? That, in terms of having a pension or health care or a guaranteed contract, not losing a third of your money to your manager, instead paying your agent 3% kind of thing. I think most people would be like, yeah. I'm not saying that those guys all have perfect financial literacy and they're all success stories at the end of their career also, but I think the calculus now is a lot of the great athletes are not, especially heavyweights, are not going into boxing anymore in this country. So there's a reason why Andre Ward is the last male to win the gold medal, and it was 20 years ago.
Yeah. No, well, and I mean, part of that is the money that's being put into boxing as well,
That
and
too.
amateur boxing.
That too.
But 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 there's a reason for that. They wouldn't, if boxing were doing splendidly, they wouldn't be like, all right, now we're yanking all the fucking money. So that's part of the, it's unfortunately a little bit synergistic, I suppose you could say. But in any case, yeah, I think that's like you said, it's emblematic of the times. And Deontay Wilder is a fighter of his times in that regard. And in that sense, I don't think that we're necessarily coming down hard on him. He just fits into this heavyweight picture, as do many of these other fighters. And it's not an insult to say that they don't hold a candle to the fighters of old or whatever, because in many cases they don't. And some of the fighters of old were truly the all-time greats. But just accept some of your place on the all-time great list, I guess.
But one thing is I do wonder if His Excellency buys up the whole sport, with just bottomless resources to do so. I mean, I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but that Tyson Fury against Usyk made $100 million. Have you heard that number floated as well?
What I read was that they no, what I read was that they lost closer to that because they had spent so much money on the production and spent so much money like on paying and everything that had to do with putting the event together, that they wound up like spending money basically to hold the event, and that it didn't really make anything. But what I was trying, or I think that, yeah, gosh, I'd have to go back and look at the figures, but it was something like they wound up spending 30 million. Like it wound up costing them 30 million more than it made or something like that. And so
Well,
my whole point was that, like, well, then whatever it was they paid, it's not about how much money it made. Like I understand people thinking in that metric because that makes sense. But when we're, to speak frankly, whatever, the money that they're spending, whatever money they're spending to host fights there, is not about the fight itself, but about trying to get as much goodwill and washing as much ick off as they can. So whatever they're paying is worth it.
oh
that's
no, no,
that's what it comes down to.
that 100, the sport washing element is undeniable. I mean,
Yeah.
they're willing to pay anything because you'd spend a lot more money if you had a war against your adversaries. Just get good publicity and buy off every athlete, every journalist, et
And
cetera,
that's
et cetera.
exactly what they're doing in a way where they don't have to actually do it or fire any
Yeah,
bullets. It's
that's it. Well, and I mean, exactly. I mean, Ali as this sort of secular saint and everything, like going to fight George Foreman. That was a brutal dictator that put up the money for that, who executed, I think, 10% of the prison population just to tell everybody to chill the fuck out. We don't want any crime being reported by these foreign reporters that are parachuting in. Like Ali had no problem taking that money, like or Foreman, but it's the exact same principle. Is in terms of the cost of putting on a war or $10 million to bring in a couple of super famous American celebrities to have a boxing match. It's really cheap relative. I was just asking in terms of how much money Fury made
oh
personally, Usyk, because
oh, I see what you're saying.
I heard $100 million, and
I don't know.
but like if there's that much money being offered by the Saudis, will it attract more people who go, well, that's
Of
boxing is
course,
back in
of
terms of
course,
yeah.
of course. The money always talks. I mean, but we're seeing that in real time. We're seeing all of these people, all of these principled fucking saints who are speaking out against so and so. And then when it comes time to, when it comes time to fucking jump on a plane, they're doing it.
Yeah.
And not only are they doing it, they're taking the big fucking group photo with like 50 fighters and they're all fucking, yay, no problem.
Yeah, it's a great look. It's a great look.
No
But
problem.
but I also, the last point is we're talking strictly on the basis of Wilder walking away from the sport. If he goes the Roy Jones route and starts fighting nobodies and is just a punching bag, does that influence his legacy even more? Like if he starts looking even worse than he has against Parker and Jang,
I mean, it won't help, but at the same time, it wouldn't undo anything that he's already accomplished. So, in my opinion, that's kind of like you feel like he belongs or you don't. You know what I mean? Like he could lose a whole bunch of fights from now, and either he belongs or doesn't.
yeah, I think that's true. I just sort of feel like when we mention those other names like Lyle, Cooney, Mercer, Galata, Ruddick, Tua, Morrison, none of those guys are in the Hall of Fame. And I don't know that they deserve to be, frankly. But if they don't deserve to be, Wilder has absolutely no business having a claim. None.
Well,
None.
it's all about the consistency. That's it.
Yeah.
Just stepping back and regardless of the visceral or whatever, just the consistency.
And just objectively, what is the greatest resume item that he has? Beating a 38-year-old Ortiz. Unquestionably, that is the greatest thing he ever, or knocking down Tyson Fury several times. And
That's what people are going to say most likely.
that's what they're going to say. But ultimately, I think legitimately losing all three of those fights to a better guy who now has just been bettered by Usyk. So at some point, like I think the recency bias blowing up these people. Oh my God, Usyk is this generational talent. At some point, I think that will calm down. Like if Usyk loses to a guy who we don't really respect that much, then suddenly he can't be the savior of the history of boxing. Like, and again, I'm not taking away his achievements. He's had an amazing career, but I think we've had to do this even in the 70s. Ali did not look like Ali when he's fighting Ken Norton. You could argue he lost all three of those fights. Or, what if he lost to Henry Cooper? What if, different things happened that would just be that little thing that pulls back at, is there greatness here? Of course there was greatness there, but every fighter has these like the push and pull of what they achieve versus some of the liabilities in their resume or in their like toolkit kind of thing. But few of them have such extremes as Wilder. I can't think of somebody that occupies such diametrically opposed extremes of this nuclear weapon and just such limitation in terms of skill. So it's what makes him interesting and so divisive.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely didn't come up with any answers. No definitive. Hey, dude,
Well, there's
it's
only one
all
man who could. There's only one man who could.
Bobby Ches
He's out on the road right now.
taking an Uber, taking an Uber. Just to clarify, taking an
Maybe
Uber.
he's driving an Uber.
Oh shit! No, he's a Lyft guy. It's definitely a Lyft
He
guy.
probably is a lift,
Yeah,
or maybe he's invented his own app.
that's
This guy's
true.
capable of any kind of ingenuity with that
Chill,
Mensa IQ.
shift.
I mean, he's probably collaborating with Elon Musk right now to develop like the Ches Tesla. You know,
Chesla.
yeah. Instead of
We're set.
providing him fuel, just give him vodka or whatever directly to the driver.
But just put it right into the engine. Put it right into the fucking engine. It's
Maybe
like
it's like a hybrid vehicle where half of it is Ches. He's like a cyborg vehicle.
the end of Back to the Future, where he just starts throwing shit into the fucking trash into the engine. Just
Yeah,
pour
cold
your fucking
fusion.
empty bottles right on in there.
Well, preferably your full bottles, please.
Well, yeah, for the good of everybody else on the road. Yeah,
Oh, blame Bobby. All
blame
right.
Bobby. All right. Well, I appreciate you, assessing the career of Deontay Wilder with me. Hey, look, hopefully he goes on to get a couple wins. If he is going to go on, I hope he does help his legacy. I hope he makes some money. I hope he does whatever fulfills him. But regardless, he is who he is and where he is. And Bren, thank you, man. I appreciate it. It's good time.
Good fun. But I mean, I hope Wilder fights Usyk and knocks him out, and then we have a real discussion
Jesus
about the whole
Christ. Yeah,
thing.
now then we'd have a problem. But that's
Get
what makes it
AJ,
fun.
but Usyk, then okay, maybe.
Yeah, we'd have a problem there. We'd have a lot of discussing to do. But until
Definitely.
such time, if you listen to this podcast, go ahead and go on to whatever podcast app you listen to it on, subscribe, leave a comment. We appreciate that stuff, rating and etc. If you watch on YouTube, thank you very much. Hello, and subscribe, leave a comment, all of that stuff as well. As far as social media goes, my boy Brin is on Twitter/X as Brinicio, Brinicio. Me, Patrick Connor, I'm kind of on there, boxing history dude. But the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on Instagram and Facebook. So follow those types of things. And Bren, we'll talk soon, bro.
You got it, man.
All right, everybody, later.